Nous sommes ici ce matin pour annoncer les prochaines étapes de notre plan visant à freiner la propagation de la COVID-19 et à assurer une relance économique solide. Depuis le début, notre gouvernement s'est engagé à faire tout ce qu'il faut pour aider les Canadiens et les Canadiennes et à traverser cette crise. Nous avons fait beaucoup de chemin au cours des 19 derniers mois. Les scientifiques ont accompli un travail incroyable pour mettre au point et fabriquer des vaccins contre la COVID-19. Canada is fortunate to have enough doses of COVID-19 vaccines for every eligible Canadian to be fully vaccinated. And the vast majority of Canadians have stepped up and done the right thing. Around 89% of eligible Canadians have received one vaccine dose, and around 82% of eligible Canadians have received both. So please, if you haven't received your shots yet, please do so as soon as you can. And if you have any questions about the vaccines, please talk to your trusted healthcare provider. The evidence is absolutely clear that vaccines are safe. They prevent the spread of COVID-19, they significantly reduce the severity of cases, and most importantly, they save lives. They also allow our businesses and workplaces and schools to reopen and to stay open. Our absolutely strongest and most important economic policy continues to be a strong public health response, and that very much includes making sure all eligible Canadians get vaccinated. That is how we avoid further entirely preventable lockdowns. To fight COVID-19, our government has taken historically unprecedented action. We shut down our economy and we closed our borders. To support Canadians and Canadian businesses in this unprecedented fight, we have invested over $289 billion to provide income and business support. That is a lot of money, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. Now, we have a tool that will allow us to finish the fight against COVID, to keep our economy open, to keep our kids in school, and to let all Canadians get back to work. Vaccines. We absolutely must use this tool, and we will. So today, we are announcing 2 strong new mandatory vaccine measures. Let me start with the first. Federal public servants in the core public administration must be fully vaccinated by October 29th. This will apply to those who work in the federal government's various departments, the RCMP, Correctional Services of Canada, the Canada Border Services Agency, and many other offices and agencies. We are taking this step to protect those who work in the federal public service, their families, and their communities. This measure also protects everyone who does business with the public service, whether it is getting access to your benefits at a Service Canada office or safely traveling across our borders. Members of the public service who are not fully vaccinated or do not disclose their vaccination status by October 29th will be placed on administrative leave without pay as early as November 15th. Aujourd'hui, nous annonçons 2 nouvelles mesures de vaccination obligatoire. Premièrement, les fonctionnaires fédéraux de l'administration publique centrale devront être entièrement vaccinés d'ici le 29 octobre, sauf exception très limitée. Cette mesure s'appliquera aux personnes qui travaillent dans les divers ministères du gouvernement fédéral et au sein de la GRC, du Service correctionnel du Canada, de l'Agence des services frontaliers du Canada et de nombreux autres bureaux et organismes. Nous prenons cette mesure pour protéger tous les employés de la fonction publique, leurs familles et leur communauté. Les fonctionnaires qui ne sont pas entièrement vaccinés ou qui ne divulguent pas leur statut vaccinal d'ici le 29 octobre seront mis en congé administratif sans solde dès le 15 novembre. We are also directing Crown corporations and agencies to implement policies that mirror those we are announcing today. The Chief of Defense Staff will issue a directive mandating vaccination for the Canadian Armed Forces. And we are working with employers in federally regulated workplaces. Les sociétés et organismes d'État devront aussi mettre en place des politiques qui reflètent celles que nous annonçons aujourd'hui. Le chef d'État-major de la Défense publiera également une directive rendant obligatoire la vaccination pour les membres des forces armées canadiennes. Et nous collaborons avec les employeurs des autres milieux de travail sous règlement fédéral pour faire en sorte que la vaccination soit une priorité. En tant que principal employeur du pays, nous voulons nous assurer que le gouvernement du Canada montre l'exemple et met en place une politique de vaccination qui assure la sécurité des gens. Notre gouvernement a d'ailleurs été réélu pour mettre en œuvre cette initiative clé. We also know that some parts of Canada are today facing a very difficult fourth wave of the virus. And there are sectors of the economy that continue to struggle. These responsible, practical, and tough actions we are announcing today will protect Canadians, prevent our healthcare systems from being overwhelmed, allow our children to continue to go to school, accelerate our economic recovery, and give businesses, including those in the hardest hit sectors, confidence that our strong economy is less vulnerable to COVID-19 related further lockdowns. Merci beaucoup. And let me now pass it over to the Prime Minister to talk about other measures that we're announcing today. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Christia. Comme Christia l'a dit, on a fait beaucoup de chemin dans notre lutte contre la COVID-19. Avec des millions de gens pleinement vaccinés, le Canada est un leader mondial de la vaccination. Mais notre lutte n'est pas terminée. Depuis le mois d'août, on travaille pour mettre en place des mesures de vaccination qui vont assurer votre sécurité et celle de votre famille. Ces mesures vont aussi vous permettre de reprendre vos activités préférées. Aujourd'hui, on remplit deux de nos principaux engagements, la vaccination obligatoire pour les employés fédéraux et la vaccination obligatoire pour les voyages. Christia has outlined what the mandatory vaccination that's in place immediately for federal employees will look like. The bottom line, proof of vaccination will be required by no later than the end of this month for all federal employees. And by mid-November, enforcement measures in place will make sure that everyone is vaccinated. This is about keeping people safe on the job and in their communities. And the same goes for the second commitment we made, mandatory vaccination on travel. By the end of October, everyone 12 or older on a plane or train within Canada should be fully vaccinated. There will be a short period where people who are in the process of getting vaccinated can show a negative COVID-19 test, but by the end of November, if you're 12 or older and want to fly or take the train, you'll have to be fully vaccinated, as will staff. Testing will no longer be an option before boarding. À la fin du mois d'octobre, toute personne âgée de 12 ans ou plus voyageant à bord d'un avion ou d'un train devrait être entièrement vaccinée. Pendant une courte période, on va permettre aux gens qui sont en processus de vaccination de montrer un résultat de test de dépistage négatif, mais à la fin du mois de novembre, vous devez être entièrement vacciné, tout comme les membres du personnel. Et le test de dépistage ne sera plus une option. If you've done the right thing and gotten vaccinated, you deserve the freedom to be safe from COVID-19, to have your kids safe from COVID, to get back to the things you love. And if you haven't gotten your shots yet but want to travel this winter, let's be clear. There will only be a few extremely narrow exceptions, like a valid medical condition. For the vast majority of people, the rules are very simple. To travel, you've got to be vaccinated. These travel measures, along with mandatory vaccination for federal employees, are some of the strongest in the world. Because when it comes to keeping you and your family safe, when it comes to avoiding lockdowns for everyone, this is no time for half measures. Already, we're delivering on the first of our vaccine commitments, and in the weeks to come, we'll get the job done on a vaccine passport for international travel. We'll be there to foot the bill for provinces and territories that roll out proof of vaccination programs, and we'll introduce legislation to make it a criminal offense to threaten or harass healthcare workers. Les Canadiens ont remis notre gouvernement au travail pour en finir avec cette pandémie et pour avancer vers des jours meilleurs. On va faire le travail en matière de vaccination. On va rendre la vie plus abordable pour la classe moyenne. On va prendre des mesures ambitieuses pour le climat, tout en créant de bons emplois verts, et on va avancer sur le chemin de la réconciliation. Il y a beaucoup de travail qui nous attend. C'est pourquoi, plus tard ce mois-ci, on va assermenter un nouveau Conseil des ministres afin de mettre en œuvre notre plan progressiste. Je suis très enthousiaste à l'idée de tout ce qu'on peut réaliser ensemble. Before I take questions from the media, I want to address the issue of last week. Traveling on September 30th was a mistake, and I regret it. The first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation was a time for Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people alike to reflect and connect, think about the past, but also focus on the future. I want to thank Chief Casimir of the Kamloops for the conversation we had over the weekend, in which I apologized for not being there with her and her community for this important day. And I committed to going to visit the Te Kamloops Te Swekmuk community in the coming weeks. There's a lot of work for us all to do, and I'm committed to doing it. Merci. Je suis heureux de prendre vos questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll go to the room for questions. Ashley Burke.
Hi, Prime Minister. Ashley Burke, CBC News. What made you decide to take a personal trip to Tofino on a day that your government set aside to honor the victims and survivors of residential schools?
Like I said, it was a mistake to travel on that day. This is an important moment for Canada and for Canadians to reflect not just on the past, but on the present. I was in error to choose to travel on that day, and I apologize directly to Chief Casimir for not having attended the event that she invited me to, which is why I'm looking forward to going to the community and sitting down with them in the coming weeks. Comme j'ai dit, c'était une erreur de choisir de voyager ce jour-là, le 30 septembre, et je le regrette. C'était un moment important pour se recueillir en tant que Canadien, pour réfléchir à la réconciliation. Mais je suis content que j'ai pu parler avec la chef Casimir de Kamloops pour offrir mes excuses et pour m'engager à venir la visiter, à visiter la communauté dans les semaines à venir.
But why did you do it, and did anyone advise you not to do it?
I think the how it happened is far less important than that it happened, which I regret, and we will continue to do even more on the path of reconciliation, whether it's continuing to eliminate long-term boil water advisories, whether it's making sure that there's better investments in housing and support for kids going to new and better schools across the country in Indigenous communities. There's much work to do, and I am committed to doing it.
Hi, Prime Minister. Mercedes Stevenson, Global News. This question is for both you and for Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland as well. Last night, the military announced that they were removing Major General Peter Daw from his position in providing a review of external reports into sexual misconduct in the military judicial system. This was a decision that was greeted with horror by victims of military sexual misconduct, the original decision to appoint Major General Daw to that position. There's a feeling that senior leadership in the military is not getting it months into this. Ultimately, the military reports to the civilian authority. So first, your reaction to General Daw's appointment and then unappointment, and also when will your government take action to address this externally?
I think, first of all, like so many Canadians, I was stunned and dismayed to see the media reports about this particular role. It is obvious that despite the work that the military has done, despite the work that we've done, the military still doesn't get that survivors need to be at the center and the unique priority of everything in regards to sexual misconduct and harassment in the military. And this shows they simply still don't get it. We have an awful lot of work to do. We know that, which is why we've brought in people like Justice Louise Arbour to look at how we completely transform the military culture and the way our Canadian Armed Forces operate. But this is, again, a reminder of just how much work there is to do before people understand within our armed forces that survivors need to be at the center of everything they do. Honnêtement, j'ai été stupéfait de voir les nouvelles qui racontaient cette nouvelle position et ces responsabilités. Ça démontre pour moi que malgré les efforts, et il y en a eu au sein des forces armées, ils ne comprennent encore pas que c'est les survivants, les survivantes qui doivent être au centre de toutes leurs actions. En termes de ressources, en termes d'écoute, en termes d'apprentissage. Et c'est évident que ce n'est pas encore le cas. Il y a beaucoup de travail à faire. Nous, évidemment, on va faire notre part. C'est pour ça qu'on a demandé à la justice Arbour d'être impliquée dans cette question-là et de faire des recommandations sur comment on va transformer non seulement les structures à l'intérieur de des forces armées, mais la culture profonde qui, malgré tout le travail que les médias, que les Canadiens s'attendent à ce que soit fait, que moi je m'attends à ce que soit fait, ça n'a pas été fait encore. Christian?
Yeah, thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Mercedes. And thank you for your dogged pursuit of this story. Look, I actually want to start by saying to Canadians, but also directly to people in the military, that I really recognize the incredibly hard work people in the Canadian Armed Forces do every day and how much we all rely on them. And I thought of that a lot in the spring of 2020 when we relied on the Canadian Armed Forces as a final line of protection and defense for our seniors in Quebec and Ontario. And I'm thinking about it now as someone who is so worried about Alberta. I think you probably are too, Mercedes. And knowing that the Canadian Armed Forces is there is so important. So I do want that work not to be overshadowed, and I want to say to all the people doing that work, we recognize it. Thank you very, very much. But I also think your question was exactly right. And you said, Mercedes, that it seems as if the leadership just doesn't get it. And I think that's true. I think the reality is there is a systemic problem with the treatment of women, the treatment of sexual harassment in the Canadian Armed Forces. It is clear that there is a toxic culture there. And it is clear to our government, as the Prime Minister said, that that needs to change. And it will. It's not fair to everyone, but especially to the really brave Canadian women in uniform who go to work and serve every day. And like every single woman in Canada, they should not have to work in a place where they face this kind of a culture and treatment.
As a follow-up, what kind of person do you think you're looking for the next defense minister? A lot of people don't think that Minister Sajjan should stay on, given the number of things that have happened under his tenure as defense minister, and last night's reversal just being one of the many. So I don't expect you're going to tell us who the defense minister is, but what are some of the characteristics you're looking for in that next defense minister?
As you know, we will be naming our cabinet later this month. And the reflection that goes into every single job in cabinet is who is the right person to serve Canadians, who is the right person to fulfill the high expectations that Canadians across the country have for this government in all of our priority areas. And I can assure you that there is serious reflection going into every single role in cabinet.
Sir, you made vaccine mandates a central part of the campaign. Can you explain in this policy why you feel an attestation is good enough as opposed to demanding proof of vaccination, which is currently the policy at restaurants in Ottawa, just a few blocks from here?
The attestation for the public service is the first step with severe consequences for anyone who is found to have been misrepresenting themselves in that attestation. And we are putting in place significant processes to ensure that those attestations are in fact real. But I will turn to Minister Freeland on that.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the policy is, as of October 29th, if you want to work for the Government of Canada, which means the people of Canada, you have to be fully vaccinated. The Canadian public service is vast. We are Canada's biggest employer, and so a system needs to be put in place to verify each person's status. We're starting with an attestation so that we can have a hard deadline of October 29th. The reason that there is that period until November 15th before the action of someone being put on unpaid leave is taken is to give managers time to be sure that each case is dealt with correctly. But I also want to say one thing which I think can get lost in some of the coverage of this. And that is the vast majority of Canadians are doing the right thing. And I think as Canadians, we have to remember our country is doing remarkably well, both when it comes to having the vaccines available so people can get vaccinated, but even more importantly, the vast majority of Canadians across the country are doing the right thing, are getting vaccinated. 89% with at least one shot. That is fantastic. And I really want us collectively to bear in mind, this is about the majority doing the right thing, and it is about government taking action on behalf of that majority who spoke in the election to be sure that a minority of people cannot sabotage Canada's economic recovery and cannot allow the fourth wave or other variants to cause real problems for us all.
In the tech briefing, we were told that the audits would be designed by the individual government departments. Can you tell us how rigorous you expect those audits to be? And are you prepared, as we've seen in other jurisdictions, to potentially lose thousands of public servants over this policy?
It's very straightforward. If you want to continue to work for the public service of Canada, you're going to need to be fully vaccinated. And the way to ensure that happens as quickly as possible is to allow for the vast majority of Canadians and public servants who are vaccinated to make a simple, straightforward attestation to the reality of their vaccination status. That allows managers and departments to focus in on those people who will not. Anyone who lies on their attestation will face severe consequences, and there will be verifications done over the following weeks to ensure that everyone is vaccinated. But this is about recognizing what so many public servants and Canadians have already done, which is getting vaccinated in order to keep themselves and their colleagues and their fellow citizens in their communities safe. And that is what we recognize with this particular approach. Nous reconnaissons que c'est important que quiconque travaille pour la fonction publique fédérale soit vacciné. Heureusement, plus de 80% des Canadiens et de la fonction publique sont déjà vaccinés et donc une attestation où ils vont déclarer leur statut d'être vaccinés, c'est la façon la plus rapide et la plus facile d'aller de l'avant pour reconnaître que la vaste majorité des gens ont fait la bonne chose. Mais nous allons avoir des processus en place qui vont varier de département en département selon les circonstances pour faire une vérification et quiconque aurait menti sur cette attestation va avoir des conséquences sévères, mais aussi ça va nous permettre d'assurer que on est en train de continuer de livrer pas seulement les services et le travail sur lesquels les Canadiens dépendent, mais aussi montrer l'exemple aux Canadiens d'une fonction publique qui est en train de protéger les Canadiens de toutes les différentes façons.
And I just want to add one other thing, which is vaccine mandates work. There are people in the country who just, haven't gotten around to getting vaccinated. Maybe they have some worries, sort of inchoate, amorphous concerns, and for whom having a practical reason why you need to get vaccinated is enough of a nudge to have them take this action. And actually, just last week when the Prime Minister and I were at a vaccination clinic here in Ottawa, we talked to one gentleman who told us about how his daughter had been bugging him to get vaccinated. He sort of wasn't sure he wanted to do it, but the fact that the mandates were in place and he now needed to be vaccinated to go to a restaurant, he just said, okay, what the heck? And he let his daughter drive him to the clinic that day. I think we should not discount the number of Canadians who are in that position. And these mandates are going to push us to a high enough degree of vaccination that our economy can continue to be open, our kids can continue to go to school.
Bonjour, Joël Denis Bellavance de la presse. Monsieur Trudeau, il y a un débat qui fait rage, à savoir est-ce qu'on devrait permettre les députés de faire leur entrée à la Chambre des communes sans être vaccinés. Avec la mesure que vous présentez aujourd'hui, ça veut donc dire qu'un député, je donne un exemple, un député conservateur de l'Alberta ne pourrait plus prendre l'avion pour venir à la Chambre des communes à partir de la fin octobre. C'est bien ça? Oui.
Oui, avec des mandats pour vaccination, de vaccination, quiconque veut embarquer dans un avion dans les prochains mois va devoir être pleinement vacciné. C'est une des mesures pour protéger les Canadiens, c'est des mesures pour protéger les enfants qui voyagent sur des avions qui n'ont pas encore la capacité de se faire vacciner. Et c'est une reconnaissance que il y a plus de 80% des Canadiens qui ont fait la bonne chose. On en a discuté longuement pendant cette élection et les Canadiens ont été clairs qu'ils s'attendent à ce que tout le monde fasse sa part pour se protéger et protéger les autres.
J'ai une question, Mme Freeland. Est-ce que vous avez l'intention de présenter une mise à jour économique et financière cet automne ou est-ce que vous avez l'intention d'attendre au budget fédéral pour présenter le dernier décompte du déficit et des dépenses du gouvernement fédéral?
Une excellente question et on est en train de discuter ça avec le Premier ministre.
Oui, bonjour, Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Bon, M. Trudeau, dans les règles qui sont présentées aujourd'hui, il y a des exemptions religieuses. J'aimerais savoir quelle religion interdit la vaccination?
C'est une très, très bonne question. Et ce que je veux dire d'abord, c'est que les exceptions, que ce soit des exceptions médicales ou autres, vont être extrêmement limité et difficile à obtenir. On sait qu'il y a beaucoup de gens qui sont hésitants, qui sont résistants. Ce sera pas une conviction personnelle qui va être assez. Ça va vraiment prendre des exemples concrets. Nous sommes en train justement de travailler la fonction publique avec la Santé Canada par rapport aux exemptions médicaux, mais aussi médicale, mais aussi avec d'autres partenaires pour les autres exemptions. Mais je peux dire que ça va être extrêmement difficile et rare d'avoir des exemptions à ce programme parce que on le sait, c'est par la vaccination qu'on va en finir avec cette pandémie et protéger les Canadiens et protéger notre économie. Let me say from the start that the intent of these measures is to ensure that anyone working for the federal public service, that anyone wishing to travel on a plane or a train, be vaccinated. And exemptions, whether they're medical exemptions or otherwise, will be exceedingly narrow, specific, and, to be honest, somewhat onerous to obtain. The goal is to make sure that everyone who can chooses to get vaccinated. We will, of course, work with, as we are with Health Canada, on defining those medical exemptions, on other partners, on other exemptions. But let me say that simply having a personal conviction that vaccines are bad will not be nearly enough to qualify for an exemption to that.
Et pour les gestionnaires, ça va pas être évident de dire, lui, par exemple, la religion l'empêche vraiment de se faire vacciner, lui, ça ne l'empêche pas. Qu'est-ce que vous dites aux gens qui croient que, finalement, vous laissez aux gestionnaires la tâche de trancher, la tâche difficile de trancher, et que vous lavez un peu les mains, finalement?
Non, au contraire. Les directives que nous allons partager dans les semaines à venir, bien avant la date butoir de fin octobre, vont être extrêmement claires sur quelles seront des exemptions acceptées, mais je peux vous dire qu'il va pas en avoir beaucoup. Ça va être extrêmement difficile à obtenir et c'est une responsabilité que le gouvernement va prendre d'être extrêmement clair là-dessus pour que ce soit pas du cas par les opérateurs aériens ou par des gestionnaires dans différents départements.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau, Olivier Ferrand-Boissé de TVA. Je veux revenir sur Tofino. Pourquoi avoir menti sur l'itinéraire et quel message ça envoie?
Il n'y a eu aucun mensonge là-dedans.
L'itinéraire disait que vous étiez à Ottawa?
Non, l'itinéraire disait que j'avais des rencontres privées. Effectivement, j'ai eu des appels pendant des heures cette journée-là avec des survivants des pensionnats autochtones.
Bon, dans ce cas-là, je me demandais aussi quelle responsabilité vous prenez dans le fait que, au terme de cette première journée-là nationale de réconciliation, on ait parlé plus de vous que de réconciliation.
Évidemment, dans mon discours le soir avant pour lancer cette journée ici sur la colline parlementaire, j'ai parlé du besoin de nous tous de se pencher, autochtones et non autochtones, sur ce qui s'est passé dans les pensionnats autochtones et notre responsabilité de comprendre la vérité du passé, mais d'être présent pour la guérison et de bâtir mieux pour le futur. C'était aussi ce que j'ai entendu des survivants auxquels j'ai parlé pendant la journée. Nous avons tous du travail à faire et je prends tout à fait ma responsabilité de faire mieux dans l'avenir.
Glenn McGregor, CTV News. Prime Minister, by the end of the month, it's going to be up to gate agents at airports to scan people's proof of vaccination visually. And they have, of course, a patchwork of different systems right across the country because your government has failed to produce a national standard. When are you going to create an app that can be used right across the country that people will be able to show show their proof of vaccination?
A couple of things on that, Glenn. First of all, as you know, it is the provinces as the deliverers of medical services who have the information on citizens as to who is vaccinated, who is not, and with how many doses of what. The federal government doesn't have that information, and quite frankly, for privacy reasons, are happy to not have that information, which is why we are working with provinces across the country on proofs of vaccination, and we are working to standardize them so that they are available to people to travel internationally in a unified format that will allow for that. So we know that the work that we're doing right now with provinces across the country on proofs of vaccination will be beneficial for restaurants and gyms, but also will help for international and domestic travel. In regards to the gate agents, I can tell you that the work that we're doing with the major carriers in this country is to integrate the proof of vaccination digital codes into their online booking process so that when you print out your boarding pass, either at the airport or in advance, there will be a clearly marked proof of vaccination thumbs up or check mark so that the gate agent does not have to be checking documentation. That's part of the work we're doing with the air carriers, because we know that the more than 80% of Canadians who've done the right thing, who've gotten themselves vaccinated, who have the proof of vaccinations from their provinces, don't deserve to be slowed down in their desire to travel and face more onerous tasks. And that's why we're ensuring that will work as smoothly as possible.
Okay, so when is this going to come? You say you're working with the provinces. In Europe, since the spring, they've had a standardized digital vaccine passport that's multinational, as well as proof of vaccinations within those subnational governments within those countries. If Europe can do it with much larger number of people and more jurisdictions, why can't you do it here with 10 provinces?
But we are doing it, Glenn. We have this smart health card format that has been adopted in California, New York, multiple other states, I think 20, 25 other states, as well as most of the jurisdictions across this country that are moving forward in a unified format that will allow for people to have that proof of vaccination. As we said, this is an extra responsibility that the provinces need to step up on, which is why the federal government will be footing the bill for the development of those proof of vaccination certificates. We are looking forward to having all provinces be on board with this to make sure that their citizens have the opportunities to travel, to get back to the things they love doing as quickly as possible once they've done what over 80% of Canadians have done already, which is getting vaccinated.
Yes, hello, I'm Mike Blanchfield, Canadian Press. Prime Minister and, of course, Deputy Prime Minister as well, if you'd like to weigh in. Are you going to make it a requirement, or what are your thoughts on having MPs in the House of Commons fully vaccinated and everyone who works in that building, including political staff and not just public servants?
I have been clear that every single MP for the Liberal Party needs to be fully vaccinated. All of our candidates needed to be fully vaccinated with one limited medical exception for one of our candidates. Most of the other parties have done exactly the same because we recognize that it's the way to get through this. It's the way to lead by example. It's the way to ensure that Canadians do the right thing. Everyone who works for the federal government, who works within the parliamentary precinct, will be required to be vaccinated. MPs, because of issues of parliamentary privilege, will have to figure out how to move forward. I know discussions are engaged with, and let's be direct about it, members of the Conservative Party of Canada who have not been unequivocal on vaccinations. We know that all other MPs in this House will be vaccinated. So it is something for Erin O'Toole and the Conservative Party to deal with. That they will have MPs not able to get on planes to come to Ottawa if they are unvaccinated. They will have MPs putting their fellow colleagues at risk in a large but closed windowless room in the House of Commons who may be sitting beside or near someone who is unvaccinated. This is a serious issue that the Conservative Party of Canada is going to need to grapple with. We will, of course, engage in as constructive a way as possible, but Canadians expect us both to lead by example and not be vectors of transmission to each other or to people working in the public service.
I agree with what the Prime Minister has said. And, look, I think we really need to, all of us who have been through an election, Canadians have made a choice. I certainly found just myself personally campaigning. And, I campaigned across the country from the Pacific Coast to the Atlantic Coast. I knocked on a lot of doors with our candidates. And in my own experience, there were two issues people cared about the most. One was childcare, and I feel we have really a clear mandate to get the job done. But the most important thing that I heard from people is they wanted us to finish the fight against COVID, and there was very strong support for vaccine mandates. I think it's so important to emphasize the vast majority of Canadians have themselves gotten vaccinated, and they want to put this behind us. They are aware of really the miracle of vaccines that allows us to do that. And I really believe they elected a government to go ahead and do that. And I would say to every single MP who was elected, no matter what party, your constituents, your neighbors put a lot of trust in you. The majority of your neighbors are vaccinated. And really now is the time to just sort of take a deep breath and say, let's do the right thing for Canadians. Let's do the right thing for the economy. We've spent $289 billion and counting on income support and business support. This has been a national trauma and a very, very expensive national trauma. And at this point, we all know there's a tool we can use to end it. Members of Parliament have the single greatest personal responsibility to act, and we're calling on them to do that.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question.
Murad Hamadi, The Logic. Minister Freeland, the 2021 budget states that Canada's upcoming digital services tax will apply, quote, until an acceptable multilateral approach comes into effect. What does the government consider to be coming into effect? Is that Friday when you're supposed to announce an OECD deal? Is it when the global minimum tax takes effect? Is it when the Pillar 1 redistribution takes effect? What does what takes effect mean?
Okay, that is an excellent question. And as you know, our government has been devoting a lot of energy, as have governments around the world, to working on the OECD level deal that would bring in two pillars of international taxation. There was a G7 finance ministers meeting just last Wednesday, and I have over the past 2.5 weeks, had conversations with Janet Yellen, Rishi Sunak, Olaf Scholz, Bruno Le Maire, and Daniela Franco, as well as Matthias Cormann, the Director General of the OECD. So that's just to give you a sense of how intensively Canada is engaged in this issue. That is a plane that is still in the air. We haven't landed it yet, so I'm not going to speculate right now on details of where the plane will land, but I will say that Canada has been clear about two things in our fall economic statement last year, in our budget this spring. First of all, to our commitment to working very, very hard for a multilateral agreement. That agreement will be really good for Canada's bottom line. It will prevent the current international race to the bottom on corporate taxation and will ensure that the world's biggest companies pay taxes where they do business. So this is a really important deal. Canada is very, very committed to doing it, and we're working hard on it right now. Number two, we have also said, because people have been working on this deal for a really long time, that absent a deal, we're committed to going ahead with a DST. That's why we announced that commitment in the fall economic statement last year. In the budget in the spring, we included it in our fiscal framework. So those are our two commitments, and we're working really, really hard with our international partners.
You just mentioned the amount of money the government has spent to prop up the economy during the pandemic. The wage and rent subsidies expired this month. Will you extend them?
Do you want to? So look, I am very aware of that. And the Prime Minister and I have had a number of conversations about it already. And I have been speaking to a lot of Canadians about this, as has the Prime Minister. Just last night, I had a good conversation with Dan Kelly about it. It's one of the reasons that our first act was putting in place these vaccine mandates, because we really have to finish the fight against COVID, and vaccines are the way to do it. Having said that, we are aware of a couple of things. One is that the fourth wave and the Delta variant are hitting parts of the country particularly hard, and we know that government policy very much needs to be mindful of that, and we are going to be there for Canadians across the country in this fight against COVID. And we are providing support to the healthcare systems in the hardest hit provinces, and we will provide economic support as needed, and we're working on that. And then we're also aware, as we committed to during the campaign, that while some sectors of the economy are recovering very robustly, and that is great, there are some sectors that have been and continue to be particularly hard hit. Tourism and events are some examples. And so we are working on ways to ensure that support is there for them. So we'll have more to say about the specifics soon.
But again, it comes down to the bottom line of the promise that we made at the beginning of this pandemic, to have Canadians' backs as much as it took, as long as it took. Not just because that's the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do, to ensure that our economy is bouncing back, to make sure that businesses can thrive once again quickly, to make sure that we have the opportunities to keep people safe, to get back to normal, and to grow our economies. And that's what we're going to focus on doing, and that's what we'll have more to say on in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Prime Minister. That concludes the press conference.